Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to wherever you may be, or whatever time you may be watching this. Welcome to the 9th episode of the LVM podcast. My name is Rebecca Benny, and today I'll be talking about how I avoided my grief after finding out my mother was murdered. For those that may be new to my podcast, to the LVM podcast, or to LVM Advantage in general, I was 17 years old when my mother was murdered. And, at that age, I was kind of like, in a phase where I was about to graduate high school, about to enter in college, and, I kind of just wanted to do my own thing. And it's weird to say, but it's like my mother's murder was kind of like preventing me from like living a normal teenage life. And it really changed a lot of things at that time, and I wanted to push everything away. And as I started LVM Advantage last year, in 2020, that was kind of like that year where I've actually, realized my grief and paid attention to it. And as LVM Advantage has grown over the year, I realized that my grief journey has been filled with a lot of avoidance. And it's not something that I'm proud of or anything, but it is something that is a part of my journey, and I think it's important to talk about, only because a lot of us really do go through this part of our journey where we do avoid a lot of things. And that's okay if that's what helps us, get through day-to-day activities in life. And as LVM Advantage has grown, and I start meeting new people that haven't really met someone who's speaking out about their homicide grief journey specifically, they ask me about, what is my advice to those who are going through a similar loss. And, every time I am asked that question, it is difficult for me to answer, only because within the first 6 years after my mother was murdered, my grief journey was filled with avoidance, and I pretty much avoided everything. So it's not like I can really advise other survivors anything, because the only way I knew how to cope was to avoid, and that's something I don't want to recommend to anyone. So, I'm here on this podcast episode today to explain, why I avoided things and how I avoided things, and, just to like give my input as to like those who are on the outside, who are not experiencing a homicidal loss, and how they can maybe like, learn how to respond better, or to those, maybe like if they come across someone else who's also going through a homicidal loss. Because part of my journey of like avoiding has been like not telling people in general. Obviously that's why I avoided it. Yeah, just a quick rundown of what I will be talking about throughout this episode is about how I avoided not only like talking about my mother, also avoiding, my family, friends, and, ultimately like avoiding myself. All homicidal losses are unexpected. No one really is warned ahead of time that their loved one is going to be murdered. Till this day, regarding her grave site, or, her tombstone, she does not have an actual tombstone or headstone on her grave till this day. And it's really like a weird thing to even mention, I would say. At that time, I was 17 years old. It's not like there was a lot of things that I could do. My father was going through his own grief and, dealing with it the way that he could. And it's really weird because, everything is paid off for. Like, technically, we already picked out the headstone. I'm not sure as to why it's not there. But, maybe it's kind of like one of those final things that we never really got around to do. Even along with talking about her grave, I haven't been to her gravesite in over 6 years. The last time I went and visited her grave was on her birthday, and it was really awkward for me because some may or may not know I wasn't close with my mother, so it's not like I really did anything for her birthday. But that year, I was like, maybe I should do something to respect her and honor her. And I went to the gravesite, and it was really awkward because I didn't know what to do. I was literally standing there, and this might be TMI, I don't really care. I had to use the bathroom very badly, so it was just me crossing my legs, trying not to pee my pants, and I'm just like, yeah, I gotta go, sorry. And I thought, in my head, technically, I thought I would keep going to her grave, to respect her. I even told my dad, after going, I'm like, yeah, I went to her gravesite today. And then, a few days later, I hear that my family is like calling me saying, oh, I heard you went to her grave and whatnot. I'm like, yeah. And, it was like the weirdest thing because they're like, oh, we didn't know you're gonna do this, because everyone was sort of shocked, like, and surprised that I even went because I wasn't close with her. So I'm just like, all right, what do you expect me to do? And it kind of, this is really an ego thing, if I'm going to be honest. It's like, why is it any of your business as to what I do? Why go to her grave? Like, why do you need to, I don't know how to explain it. I just didn't like the fact that they were trying to, like, show how surprised they were that I would even go. Like, I don't need to hear your feedback about, like, oh, we didn't know you cared. I mean, like, just because I don't outwardly express everything that I'm going through doesn't mean I don't care what happened to her. And, that just really irritated me. So I'm just like, from now on, I'm just not going to go there. So ever since that incident, I haven't been to her grave. And, I personally, I don't know. There's probably more to it. It's just I haven't reached that point in my journey where I can really bring myself to even go there. Like, recently, after, my mother was murdered and everything, I kind of like try to act like, everything was normal at school. I didn't want people like acting weird around me, so I was like playing that part like, nothing has happened in my life. And I don't want you to act like something has happened, because we got to move on. That's pretty much what my mentality was in order to like survive high school. I remember, like, less than a month after my mother's murder, I decided to go hang out with my friends, obviously distract my mind, because I wanted to be away from my family, because like their attitude like during that time was just so like, there's nothing wrong with how they reacted, but it's just like I needed time away from them, because, my friends obviously understood at the time that I just didn't really want to talk about it. And I was kind of like trying to avoid it. So I guess they were just like being supportive in that way to help me like avoid my thoughts in a way. It was kind of like the unspoken thing that everyone knew what was going on in my mind. And I don't know why I agreed to watch this movie, but deep down inside, I knew this movie was not the perfect movie for me to watch. I don't know if you guys heard of it or watched it. I believe it was called No Good Deed or something like that, with starring Idris Elba and Taraji P. Henson. Idris Elba is basically this guy who's a criminal, and who's killed, a decent amount of people, I would say. And he eventually stops by Taraji P. Henson to use her phone or something because his car broke down. And it ends up him, like, pretty much just attacking her in her own house or whatever. And, as much as I tried to avoid like my feelings regarding my mother and her murder, during this whole movie, in my mind, I was just thinking like, oh, is this what my mother went through? Because you can see Taraji actually like, literally fighting for her life to save herself and her children and everything in the house and whatnot. And all I could think of is like just me sitting in that movie theater seat and being like, wow, I really wonder like if this is what my mother went through. It was still very like fresh at that moment, And I'm just sitting there like thinking like, I wonder if my friends like are thinking the same thing that I am. But like they're not the ones going through what I went through. So it was just like a lot of these weird emotions going through. I'm just like, why did I agree to watch this movie? And it was just, yeah, it's just the weirdest thing ever. Those are like a few examples within my high school life about like how I avoided trying to think about what my mother went through and my feelings about the whole thing. So, after graduating high school, starting college, I pretty much kept the same mindset about how I just wanted to move on with my life and, act like nothing really happened. And, obviously, for pretty much every homicide case, they always will have a court case or trial or whatever. And I did not go to any of them. I went to none of the court cases because I don't know. I don't think I didn't find it necessary for me to go for some reason. I think I really just wanted to avoid it and just block it out. And not only that, the trials were taking place like while I was starting, my first few classes of college, and I didn't want to explain that part of my life to my teachers. I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, my mother was murdered and I have to go here, because it's just like, why do they need to know? Why do you need to know? You don't need to know that part of my life. And I kept that very secretive. I didn't tell anyone, like any of my friends that I had made during college, because I honestly wasn't expecting to actually make any long-term friends. Like, it kind of sounds harsh, but I don't know. I think I was pretty closed off in college, and I kind of just wanted to get my degree and just get out, and that is what I pretty much did. And sometimes I feel bad about it because they're really nice people, but I just didn't feel like I was truly connected with them. Like, I don't know. It's just a part of me didn't really feel like they needed to know. And I feel like I have the right to feel like that. But I will say, I did give 2 people chances. I did tell 2 people at my college about my mother. The first person I told was this girl, who honestly I actually don't regret telling technically, because she, I don't, and I just had this gut feeling that I could trust her, because we literally had like all the same classes, we were in the same major, and I felt like we kind of were like in similar in a lot of ways. So I trusted her, and I really expected like our friendship to really be really close, and we were really chill with each other. Um, and she reacted like any good-hearted person would react. It was just pretty much me telling her like, yeah, we were just talking about like our home life, who we stay with and whatnot. And, me just explaining like, yeah, well, I don't live with my mom because, she's dead. And then she was like, oh, and she was like, oh, like how? I'm just like, she's like, you don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But I told her anyways, because I'm like, yeah, I trust you. Like, there's nothing really for me to hide from you. And yeah, the reason why I told her is because I really thought we were going to end up being like close friends afterwards. I mean, it's not that like, how do I explain this? It's like kind of one of those things where I feel like when we enter college, people say that you will find like your one of your closest friends there. And, I thought she really was going to be that person. I mean, we were pretty much in every other class together, and, some things don't work out as we always plan. She found also like her own friend group there because, she picked up a job there when she found other people, and I just kind of like did other things. Nothing too deep to get into, but the point is that, it's not like we really talk every day or anything. So part of me, I think I don't tell people because it's just like, if you're not going to be in my life forever, just like, why should I even get to like the point of telling you about like what is happening or what has happened to me? And, it's really funny because technically we actually work at the same job, but it's just funny how life works out. Either way, so the second person I told at college. Now this person I regret, and they were the pretty much like the final straw for me to even consider telling anyone, because I'm just like, this is not worth it if people are going to react like this. So starting, off college, as a freshman in college, at my school, they had like these little groups for freshmen to like meet people, and then you obviously have your senior leaders. So I was talking to my senior leader, and he was like, okay, let's tell me something about you, like, let's get to know each other. I'm like, all right, maybe I can trust this guy because he's a senior leader, he should be trustworthy, blah, 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 blah. Either way, we get to the point of, my life, and, I tell him about my mother, and, you know how it goes. I tell him the details, and this is his response. He was like, oh, I understand. I was born early. Now, I'm just like, okay, I guess that's the same thing. And I'm just like, oh, did your mom die because of that? He's like, oh no, she's fine, but I understand what you're talking about. I'm just like, I don't think that's the same thing. It's not the worst response someone could have when you tell them that your mother was murdered, but it's something that I don't really think is related to a murder. So I'm glad you're healthy and your mother is healthy. I'm glad you both survived because, birth is nothing to play with. But I would not recommend you to say that to someone who is talking about their mother being murdered. It's not the same thing. So, yeah. So, I was just sitting there and just like, okay, well, this conversation is pointless. So, yeah, that was one of the main reasons why I didn't tell any of my other friends I met throughout college about my mother. And I did pretty well for the first few, like, 2 years about not telling anyone. I was able to, like, avoid talking about my mom and my family because, I would always divert it somehow until people, like, started getting interested in my life, like, 3 years after. And I would just be, and like my quick response would be like, yeah, I don't have a mother, or she's just not in my life. And I would just keep repeating that, like, yeah, no, she's just not in my life. And it'd be like, oh, why not? Like, is she just like gone? Like, did she go away? I'm just like, no, she's just not in my life. And that's it. I kept it simple as that. I don't know. I sometimes I feel bad because, I feel like they're great people, like I said, but it's just like, it wasn't really worth it. And I don't regret that because I don't really talk to them now. And, I'm happy with myself for sticking true to what I wanted. Because I feel like had I been vulnerable and told them a part of my story, I probably would have regretted telling people that weren't really worth knowing about that part of my life at that time. The next, area in my life that I pretty much avoided has been family. And to be specific, it is her family that I actually avoid. So I'm not sure if you guys actually watched my previous episode about how I wasn't close to my mother and how that has affected my grief. Because I wasn't close with her and she didn't really share her part of her life with me, I was never close with her family, and I knew nothing about her family, and I still don't really know much about them. I straight out avoided talking to them. Like, breaking the news to them was really difficult for me because of the language barrier and just the fact that, they don't live here. They live in a totally different country. And it's just been difficult because it's like that's literally a part of her life that I just don't want to get into right now. And I feel like it'll just bring in a lot of memories, and I feel like just a lot of emotions would just overflood my mind. And yeah, I don't really want to get into that because I don't think I'm ready to know that part of her. It's kind of like ever since my mother has been gone from my life, it's like I've learned more and more about her, and it kind of like makes me a little bit more mad every time I learn something new, because I'm just like, why did she hide all this from me when she was alive? So it's very frustrating for me to like really learn more about her as the years go by. And ultimately, I'm not ashamed for how I had to cope these past few years, because I felt like I really had no choice in order to survive. And I think it's important for others, to realize that if that's how you need to get through each day, then that's what you have to do. But I think when it comes to avoidance, it's really important to talk about, the after effects of avoidance. Yes, avoidance does help us get through each day, and there's nothing wrong with that, like I said, but every time you keep avoiding things, things do bottle up. And intrusive thoughts, I believe, are definitely a side effect of that, because we cannot avoid our inner thoughts and what goes on, like, truly deep within us. And, this is something I definitely went through, like, the few weeks after my mother passed away. During the day, I would act like everything was perfectly fine, but at night, when I'm in my room, I would stare at the walls and just be totally and completely numb to my emotions. I wouldn't really cry or anything. It would just be me in silence. And then out of nowhere, all these thoughts would just start running through my head, about what my mother went through. And for those who may or may not know, when my mother was murdered, during that time, I was out with my family, fishing. And the thoughts that would pop up in my mind were just like that same scenario about how my mother would be fighting for her life, and I would be thinking about that. But while she was fighting for her life, I was literally enjoying my life. And it's something that continues to pop up in my mind a lot, because it's just like kind of one of those things where a lot of survivors of homicide will think about their loved one struggling and like what they went through and how they felt. Like, you just start having all these thoughts about like the suffering that they went through, and then you just start feeling all this guilt and blame and just everything, just like a lot of other emotions that just come along with it. And sometimes, because of the thoughts that we get, it's just like you want to stop thinking about that. So therefore, we start avoiding a lot of things in life, and we feel like there's no other way to really cope. And like I said, there's absolutely nothing wrong, personally, that I feel with avoidance, but I feel like along with my journey of realizing that I have been avoiding a lot. Sometimes it is important to come to that realization and awareness of how we are coping. And that's one of the main things about LVM Advantage, is about like how the losses in our life really do overtake our mind. But we can be in control of ourselves and our lives and not have that loss take over our minds, because we all really do go to a dark place, especially with dealing with a homicidal loss. It's really not easy to really like accept the reality of it, because it's just so like brutal, honestly. Like the thoughts that pop up in my mind is just like, it's really crazy, if I'm going to be honest. And I can only speak for so many of us survivors that what we go through, like everyone goes through it differently, but for the people that I have been in contact with, the majority of us, go through the same thing. And this is, part of our story, and I feel like it's truly important to talk about how, we all do go through avoidance, but then at the end of the day, we can really, work through it. There's nothing wrong with what we're going through or how we're coping, but, awareness is definitely key about how we do cope and how we can cope better and what's best for us. So, coming to the end of this episode, I want to thank all of you for joining me. And if you are watching this on YouTube, thank you so much. Please like and subscribe if you would like to. And if you're listening to this on a podcast streaming platform, thank you so much. I do want to let you guys know that I do have an Instagram page for LVM Advantage, and I recently started a anonymous submission form for survivors of homicide victims. So if you are a survivor, I would really appreciate it if you went to the link in my bio on Instagram. I also have it in the YouTube description box below. So you can check out the submission form. It's just a few questions for us survivors to answer about how we go through our grief, and just like sharing our experiences so that people who do not go through a homicidal loss, so they can understand, in order for us to raise homicide awareness. I find this like really important in order for us to do this for our loved ones and for our community. So yeah, thank you guys so much again, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye!